Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Each week I have this great privilege to introduce to you both lay and clergy who have been led by the Spirit to open their hearts and minds to the beauty not only of our Lord Jesus Christ but of His church. And I'm always excited when I have a former minister joining us on the program, partially because of our work with the Coming Home Network, but also because having been, in this case, a fellow Presbyterian minister, it's a great privilege to invite to the program Jason Stellman, former Presbyterian minister. His website is creedcodecult.com. Sounds interesting, right? We'll have to check that out. Jason, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
Really is good to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
I love having a former Presbyterian minister with me because we've been on the same path in different ways.
Yeah, indeed.
And some of the same fingerprints of the Holy Spirit, for the same reasons, opens our hearts to the church.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, let me get out of the way and invite you to start way back at the beginning and give the audience a glimpse of your early spiritual journey.
Well, I grew up in a pretty nominal Christian home. When I was a kid, I have a younger brother, and then there's me and my parents. And we'd go to church Christmas and Easter, whether we needed it or not.
Presbyterian?
No, we just went to a community church,
okay.
A local community church. And when I was about 12 years old, my mother decided that, and she actually grew up Catholic, she decided that my brother and I need religion in our lives, more religion. And we didn't really understand why and what that meant, but there was a family in our neighborhood who were a part of this Baptist church, and they had an Awana program. Are you familiar with Awana? It's sort of like a youth group, sort of like Boy Scouts, with a lot of Bible reading and memorization. And so she enrolled us in this Awana program, and that was sort of my first exposure to Christianity. And I remember they read us a story. They'd always have a little story that they'd read, and then there was a spiritual lesson at the end. And the story they read, I vividly remembered, it was about this little boy who wasn't a very good Baptist. And he went to church, or he went to school one day, and when he got home from school, his entire family had been raptured, and they were gone. His mother, his father, his siblings, his pets, I don't know, they were all gone. And he was left alone to go through the Great Tribulation, by himself. And so it had the desired effect of...
What a loving God.
Yeah, right.
What a loving God who would pull the father and mother
I know, and leave poor little Billy
kid
by himself. But it had the desired effect because I realized I don't want to be a Baptist like this kid. And so I prayed the sinner's prayer first with a friend of mine who was my age. But then I wasn't convinced when we were done that he knew what he was doing. And so I got one of the leaders of the church to pray the sinner's prayer with me. And they gave me a Bible. I was eventually put in a catechism class and baptized at about the age of 12 in the Baptist church. That was the sort of beginning of Christianity for me, but it didn't really take. I called myself a Christian, but I didn't take it all that seriously.
Is it because you didn't take the rapture seriously?
You know what it was? It was that all the other kids my age weren't taking it seriously.
Yeah.
So we'd go to church and we'd go through the motions. We'd go to the summer camp every summer, but the whole point of going to summer camp was just to pick up girls. That's all we cared about. And it wasn't when I was about 16 is when I changed churches. I started going to a Christian high school my junior year. And that's when I got exposed to other kids my age who really loved the Lord, who really took the Bible and prayer seriously. And so that's when my Christian life really began at my junior year.
I've got a lingering question, though, from something you said earlier that I want to get off the table. You said your mother had been brought up Catholic.
Yeah.
What happened there? Was she anti-Catholic? Do you remember anything about that?
She, I don't know a whole lot about it. She's from New Zealand. And so she grew up Catholic in New Zealand. Her family moved to Sydney when she was a teenager. I think she had a couple just off-putting experiences in the church.
So it wasn't that she married out of the church, it was something from her childhood?
Well, she did marry out of the church.
Okay.
But before that, I think she, once she was free, she took off with her sister when she was 18 and hitchhiked around Europe for several years and just I think left most of that Catholicism behind, and it never picked it back up again.
So, would you look back and see any influence then from your mother in terms of you're going to go to the Baptist or something else, but the Catholic Church is just not an option?
It never came up until, if you fast forward about 25 years, when I'm sure we'll get to this eventually, but when I brought up recently that I'm seriously considering resigning my ministry and becoming Catholic, she was very confused, and probably still is a little bit confused, and my dad too.
Okay.
And we can talk about that.
No, we'll get to there.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, now as a young man, and the thought of the rapture scared the what out of you, so you kind of commit yourself, but none of your other friends are really into it. So you're not into it, but you go to Christian high school.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, now you're seeing some seriousness.
Well, because I'd never really met other teenagers, other high school kids who took it seriously. And so there were times when I was new at this school, Calvary Chapel High School in Orange County, California, I'd make jokes about Christianity and make comments that I didn't take it seriously, and those jokes weren't laughed at, and the kids were kind of like, "Hey, that's not cool to joke about this. We care about this," and that was, sometimes seeing someone your own age taking it seriously is more powerful than having it preached at you by a pastor or a parent. Yeah. So that's when my Christianity really kind of took root, and it hasn't stopped since then.
All right.
It's changed forms.
Were you still Baptist at the time?
Well, theologically, yes. But by this time I was involved in Calvary Chapel, which is a non-denominational denomination. It's a huge church in many churches throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. It's technically non-denominational, and it's sort of megachurch style evangelical, kind of big, rock band worship, but we took the Bible really seriously.
Yeah, I think, and again, the audience may not know this, but it's probably one of the earlier modern mega-church movements.
Yes.
And a major influence.
Well, it began in 1965. And in fact, Chuck Smith, who was the pastor, just died last week after battling cancer.
Wow.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
But he was one of the, if not the, kind of pioneer of the Jesus movement on the West Coast that spread everywhere. And it was the late 80s, early 90s when I came around that church. And, for all of the things about evangelicalism that I might take objection to now, the fact was at that time that there was such an emphasis on the Bible. Yeah. And I think to this day, I bet 75% of the Bible knowledge I have rattling around in my head is from those days. Because you just read it and you memorize it, and a high school Bible study would last an hour because we really cared about the Word. And that's one of the reasons I'm thankful for that period in my life, even though I left that eventually, but all the scripture that I digested.
And a true life-changing surrender to Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was real. It was something that was profound and powerful for us. Yeah. I certainly remember that days. And often the theology is not very deep. I don't want to be critical in that at all. I mean, they're not non-Trinitarian. It's just that the emphasis was truly on Jesus, a surrender to Jesus Christ, and then reading the scriptures to know Him and to live it. Yes, and there's something commendable, certainly.
Right, of course so.
That. Yeah.
Oh, very much so. Well, you're here because of that. I mean,
absolutely.
Truly that. Yeah. So when you get involved with that, do you take leadership roles? What happens?
Yeah. I remember very vividly, early on, my junior year of high school, the youth pastor, who I'm still friends with to this day, pulled me aside and he said, people kind of look to you and you're sort of an example. And right now you're not a very good example because of the way you're acting, and sort of you're just screwing around and you're sleeping through chapel and you're not taking anything seriously. And people look to you, and you need to realize that before the Lord. And
you said, no, I'm praying. I wasn't sleeping. I was praying.
Right. Yes, and that was sort of sobering, and it wasn't long after that I started taking things more seriously. In Calvary Chapel, there's a high emphasis on serving the Lord and a very low emphasis on kind of anything that might get in the way, including education, formal education. So it's not uncommon at all for someone like me to be encouraged to perhaps not go to college, but instead go serve the Lord somewhere doing something useful. Because after all, we were all waiting for the rapture to happen. And who wants to waste 4 years at university when you could be off serving the Lord somewhere, especially since he's coming back?
I forgot that was a big part of their theology.
Oh yeah, a big part. And so I and two of my friends, we moved to Africa when we were 18 and lived in Uganda teaching the Bible for several months, about 8 months, in these various villages and pockets outside of Kampala as a Calvary Chapel missionary. And so leadership on some level began as soon as I became an adult. I was thinking about it last night as I was not sleeping, that I've spent literally all of my adult life in some form of, Christian ministry and Christian leadership, just different forms, but some form the whole time.
Once again, a positive outcome of
I look back
that
and I
ministry.
think I wouldn't trade the time I spent in Africa, and then I spent 6 years in Europe after that. I wouldn't trade that for anything, because that was such a formative, powerful time for me.
In the Calvary Chapel theology, would you say that it was at the core of it, what's important is your surrender to Jesus, but the importance of church was not that significant?
Yes, they would say that you should be at church, but not for the same reasons a Calvinist would say it or a Catholic would say it. Because they would say church is important because you need fellowship, you need the encouragement of other saints, you can't do it on your own. The illustration they'd use is like, you take a coal from a group of hot coals, put it by itself, it's going to burn out. It's not going to generate its own heat. It needs the other pieces. And so for me in my Calvary days, church is important. I was there almost every night of the week, not to receive the means of grace.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to tell you what the Eucharist was, but it was important insofar as you're there having an experience with God along with other individuals having one in the same room as you, and you're getting prayed for and getting cared for and getting able to talk and fellowship and that
So
kind of
baptism wasn't the crucial entrance into relationship with Christ?
No.
Yeah.
In fact, they would rebaptize all the time. I mean, if I had requested a rebaptism, I could have gotten rebaptized at every baptism they had, because they don't. It's like if you're feeling it right now, you come on into the water. They'd have it at Pirates Cove and Corona del Mar. Come out here and get baptized. Or if you're in the swimming pool at the summer camp, get baptized. Rededicate. If you want to rededicate, then you can get baptized again. So it wasn't a very clear understanding of the sacraments, certainly, at that time.
Our guest tonight is Jason Stellman. Jason, so you're in Africa. I mean, there's what we've left you in your journey. You're in Africa. You're surfing. Wow. I mean, what a thrown right into the lion's den there in terms of proclaiming the gospel. Yeah,
that was crazy. I mean, I turned 19 in Uganda, got to live, with two of my best friends in this context of serving the Lord, teaching Scripture, working alongside a local missions group. It was surreal. It was surreal to be that young and to be that far away from home. It's not uncommon to move out of the house into an apartment when you're 18, but to move out of the house into a house in the villages of Kampala is uncommon. And so it was crazy.
Any questioning at all at that point of denomination, church, faith?
No. I was card carrying Calvary Chapel, dyed in the wool.
All right.
And I didn't. In our minds, denominations are just dead. Denominations are filled with dead old people who don't love Jesus. And if you really want to be somewhere where you love Christ, churches like Calvary Chapel were where you need to be. Okay. And that's kind of the way we thought about it.
All right. So you end up in Africa, even if you ran to other missionary groups there.
Which we did, yeah. There was a bit of... I didn't become really smug until I became a Calvinist, so I wasn't quite. I didn't have the smugness down quite yet, But there was a bit of an elitism, because we really did think as Calvary Chapel missionaries that this is where the Holy Spirit is. This is where He's working. He's working in Calvary. And sure, He's working at YWAM and Campus Crusade and these other groups, but not to the degree that He's working with us. Yeah. So part of it was youthful pride and just, really loving my church. But I'm sure there was a bit of arrogance there too.
All right. Well, what happens next?
Moved back to the U.S., to Southern California in '92, and worked for a couple years in the youth ministry at my church, Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa. In the meantime, I took a 2-week trip to Russia to bring, like an outreach trip to Moscow and some other cities for a couple of weeks. But then was taking another 2-week trip helping the youth. I was sort of an assistant youth pastor, and the main youth pastor was bringing a group of kids from the high school over to Budapest in Hungary. And I was going along for the 2-week trip. And I told myself, this was in April of '94, I told myself, I'm not moving to Hungary. I'm not. I've done the living overseas missionary thing. I'm perfectly happy staying where I am. But then within a couple of days of being over in Hungary, I really fell in love with it. And I knew that was where I was supposed to be. And so during that 2-week trip, I got to know the guys who were living over there, the Calvary missionaries who were living over there really well, and found out that they wanted to start a church in Budapest, and they needed somebody to live there full time. And so I came back to the U.S., sold my stuff, and 2 months later, moved in June of '94 over to Budapest and lived there till the end of the '90s, till 2000.
Wow. When I was a pastor, Presbyterian pastor, I would have to admit that my congregations, which were generally growing, were mostly everybody else, ex-Catholics, ex-Episcopalians, ex-Methodists who wanted to come to this more evangelical Presbyterian church. What about at Calvary Chapel, and especially your little missionary work there in Hungary? Were you evangelizing totally atheist people, or were they coming from other churches, do you think?
When Eastern Europe kind of opened up in '90, '91, you had a lot of that sort of almost blank slate of people who were a lot of people are Catholic, and a lot of people were Reformed. But most of those people were sort of nominally Catholic and Reformed. And there wasn't any kind of evangelical presence at all. And the first few years of Eastern Europe being opened up, everyone came over. I mean, we'd see, hardcore Pentecostals, we'd see Hare Krishnas, Mormons. I mean, everything you can think of was just like, a new market to tap, and we were among those people who were trying to bring the real gospel to especially these university students, these young people who grew up in Catholic or Reformed homes that were very nominal and, in our minds, very, very dead. And they may not have been dead, though. We thought they were because of the way they looked and the way they practiced their faith and the things they didn't do, like, having singing and joy and all this stuff.
They didn't fit your categories for on fire.
No,
faith.
No, not at all. And we didn't realize at the time just how American and how Californian our message was. We just thought, we're just reading the Bible and bringing it to you. But it's impossible to escape your own skin. And so a lot of times we would just read kind of European and Hungarian mindset and body language and think, you don't have the Holy Spirit, or you don't have Christ because you're not the way we are. Because we're these, boisterous, loud, confident Americans.
I remember once hearing a bishop from the former Soviet Union. He came to the United States and spoke about the same time you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, about '93, '94. And he was talking about the first time that he visited one of these cities, wondering if there's any faith left, and seeing the people in a rainstorm coming out from their houses on their knees in great gratitude for the bishop. And his admission was that the faith was alive and well, not because of the bishops, but because of those people that had kept it alive in their hearts during that whole period of persecution. Yeah. But it also makes great sense to me, coming from my evangelical background, that if I had looked at them in the way they were expressing their faith, it would not have looked like what I expected as an on-fire American evangelical follower of Jesus Christ.
I remember this one time I was meeting this girl in our church I think we're going to go look at properties or places to lease for our church to meet. I forget what the reason for our meeting, but I got off the bus and crossed the street where she was waiting for me. And she looked at me and she goes, "You're so American." And I said, "What?" All I did was get off the bus and cross the street. And she goes, "I don't know." She's just, there's something about the way you stride and the way that you have this sort of way about you that's just, you're so easy to pick out of the crowd as not local. You're not a Hungarian, you're just an American. And that translated into the way we did church and the things we taught them. And, I've been back there many times, and you can even listen to the way they pray, the Hungarian Christians in Calvary Chapel, and they'll use little phrases in Hungarian, but little phrases, that's how you got that from us. That's little fingerprints of kind of the influence that we had.
A form of liturgy, though you wouldn't have called it liturgy.
Oh yeah, there's liturgy. Yeah, you don't call it liturgy because liturgy's bad, but there's definitely a liturgy in an evangelical megachurch context. Yeah. It's just different. But it's,
that really shows it when you take a Calvary Chapel from California and you plant a church in Hungary and they're using the exact same phrases.
Oh yeah.
That's liturgy.
I remember thinking that when I was in Moscow at McDonald's, and this is when it was very new. It just opened up. And so there's lines outside to get into McDonald's. You get in, you get your Big Mac and your fries and your Coke, and you eat it, and it's like tastes exactly the same as back home. But the irony was that, and the Christianity we're bringing you, much like the fast food, is very American as well, and very much exactly the same as we do it back there.
Was this affecting you then? Were you seeing this then?
I was seeing it, but I thought, here's an example. Sometimes we would say, much like we say in the Catholic Mass, give each other the sign of peace. Well, there's an evangelical version of that where after the singing before the Bible study, you say something like, "Hey, shake the hand of the person around you, say hi." And Hungarians really dug their heels because it's not in their nature to be outgoing to people that they don't know. And they would say, "That's American to make us do that. You're making us be American." And we'd think, Paul says, greet each other with a holy kiss. We're not going that far. So a lot of it was not recognizing, what the unique Americanness of what we were doing. Instead, we were sort of wondering why are the Hungarians so hung up on this? But I think we were blind to it as well.
All right. Okay, how's this lead in on your next step of the journey? Because what an experience! Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I got a hold of some Calvinist literature, and if for your viewers who may not know, Calvinism is sort of the less kind, less gentle form of evangelicalism. I got a hold of some books by guys like A.W. Pink and R.C. Sproul, who talked a lot about predestination and election and things of that nature, that brought a sort of more doctrinal flavor to my Christianity. And so I started getting really into reading these Calvinists and becoming very, very theological.
Probably the key underlining thread is this emphasis on the sovereignty of God.
The sovereignty of God, yes, that nothing happens outside of His
So that gets raised and raised and raised and raised to the point where our free will gets diminished and diminished and diminished. So it affects everything, our salvation, from the beginning of time to the end of time. Even people in missionary groups, do you go evangelize somebody in Africa? Well, God can save them. It changes everything.
Well, that's that. One of the first Calvinists I read was A.W. Pink, and he certainly fits that mold because he's. I think you could even call him a hyper Calvinist to the point where he's maybe skeptical about the free offer of the gospel. Should we offer the gospel to people who may not be chosen? Because if they're not chosen, then it's not really a gospel for them. And that really turned me off. I thought, because this is not the guy you want to read if you're brand new to this. You don't want to read this guy because he's so hardcore. Then I started getting a hold of, some more kinder, gentler Calvinists like John Piper and R.C. Sproul, who had a much more loving emphasis on the grace of God, along with the sovereignty of God. But in Calvary Chapel, Calvinism is like the theological expletive word. It's not what you're not allowed to be that. And that eventually led to my being rather unceremonially dismissed from Calvary Chapel, my having become a Calvinist.
Had you become promoting the ideas as that was getting you in trouble? Just accepting them?
I accepted them, And there were a couple of friends of mine also who were American missionaries over in Hungary who accepted them too. We would talk about them together, but never around anyone else who might overhear, because we knew that this is not accepted here. And I even brought my theological shift to the attention of one of my leaders, who I knew very well. And I kind of told him, hey, this is what I am now. I want you to know that because I don't want to be underhanded. And he said, I had a feeling you were that because I've noticed the books that you've read, and I know that what you like to read. And he kind of said, look, let's keep talking. Let's keep the communication open. Don't play a one-string guitar. Don't make an issue out of this, and we'll see how it goes.
Were you drawn to it because of flaws you saw in Calvary Chapel, or because you saw this Calvinism more biblical? What drew you to it?
It was, what started with Romans 3. I remember sitting and listening to a sermon on Romans 3, and being struck by the verse that says there are none who seek after God. Now, I can see back now that I think I had misinterpreted what St. Paul was saying in that passage. Yeah. However, at the time, it started this sort of doctrinal, theological avalanche. It began with a little pebble, there are none who seek after God. But if none seek after God, none can be saved. But some are saved. That means God must seek them, but not everyone's saved, so therefore God must seek some in a way he doesn't seek others. And so it was really the biblicalness of it in my mind, as well as the emphasis it put on God's grace as opposed to man's works, that drew me to it at the time.
All right. So it was your experience of ministering with people that also fed into...
Yeah, because I wanted to be able to give them the fullness of God's grace. I wanted to be able to give them the assurance that they could, in my mind, they can only have if they stop thinking about anything that they're doing. Because everything you do, if you're a Calvinist or even a Protestant, everything you do is tainted in some way with sin. And all sins are mortal sins. And so therefore, you need to stop thinking about your Christian life in terms of what I'm doing and how well I'm doing, or how much I'm loving, or how much I'm serving, and just look to Christ alone for his faithfulness to his Father that's given to you freely by faith alone. Of course, now as a Catholic, I still affirm those ideas in different words. Yeah. But at the time, I just sort of saw Calvary Chapel as, maybe it's legalistic, and maybe the gospel is more gracious than I thought.
Yeah, the caricature is correct. The caricature is to say that when you die and you stand before God, and God asks, why should I let you into my kingdom? As a Calvinist, from your perspective, it's nothing that you could ever have done. You're covered by the righteousness. You're not changed. You're covered by it.
You're robed with the righteous robe of Christ.
And there's nothing that you could ever have done to deserve that or even to get it. It was a complete gift of his grace that he chose from the beginning of time for you.
Yeah. And even the sanctification that the Spirit works in us by, internally transforming us as Christians, none of that plays any kind of contributory role to your salvation. And so anything you do by way of loving God and loving neighbor as a Calvinist is pure gratitude. It's an expression of thanksgiving to God for the justification that you have once for all. And so even though they would never say our good works as Christians don't matter at all, I still think they make those good works a kind of footnote to where the real action is, and that's in justification and the imputation of Christ's righteousness to us extrinsically. Yeah. And
God does it all.
God does it all.
And to take anything away diminishes is taking too much onto ourselves. Anything. It's a prideful statement.
Yeah, as R.C. Sproul likes to say, there's no island of righteousness within man that he can appeal to and say, this is something that I brought to the table. It's not that I bring 1% and God brings the rest, or however much I can't bring, God brings the rest. It's God does everything. Now, I hope before we end, we get to talk about how a Catholic understands that.
Well, that's definitely what we'll do, because the other part of this is, well, what about that person over there that may not have been chosen?
Right.
There's nothing they can do to counter that.
Right.
And that's really the hyper predestination of hyper Calvinism, and
Right.
that's that God has indeed chosen some and not chosen others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an emphasis because of a verse or two, and the way you take a verse or two then builds a whole theology out of.
Yeah. So this led to my. It was actually the way it happened was, out of nowhere, I get an email from my brother, who had sent a check for me to my church in California. Because if you wanted to support me, you can write a check and they tack that onto my support. So my support every month is different, depending on who sent what. Well, he sent a check for me to them, and he received it back with a letter saying, "We don't support them anymore. We don't." I was married by this time. I met my wife over in Budapest. She's from the East Coast of the U.S., but we met over in Hungary. Got married over there, and so all of a sudden I get this email from my brother saying, "What happened? I sent a check to the church for you. They sent it back with a letter saying we don't support Jason anymore. What's going on?" And that was the first I heard of this.
Whoa.
So.
We're going to pause there.
Okay.
That's a very interesting place to pause because we need to take a break and come back. Jason Stellman is our guest tonight. We're just leaving him holding in Budapest without any funding because of this change in theology. We'll pick up there in a bit. Welcome back to this episode of The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest is Jason Stellman. Jason, it's great to have you on the show. I've paused you, right? I'm guessing not one of your most pleasant times in life when you're over as a missionary in Budapest.
Yeah.
You were of one theological thinking, but because you shifted to a more radical theological thing, you were rejected. You don't even know in the process and find out from your brother that his donation to support you is sent back.
Yeah. So I find out through the wrong channel that apparently we've been dropped by the church. Made some phone calls, confirmed that this was true, and basically had to sell or give away all of our stuff and fly home on our own dime back to the U.S. By this time I was married. So, but as Presbyterians like to say, it was all providential because this meant that I could pursue seminary studies in the Calvinistic tradition because I knew I still wanted to be a pastor. I still wanted to teach the Bible. And so I thought, well, now that I've been kicked off the mission field, I'm back in the U.S., I can begin the process of getting MDiv and pursue ministry in the Presbyterian Church, which is what I did. So I started Westminster Seminary in California about a year after we moved back to the U.S., so in 2001. Became kind of more hardcore aggro old school Presbyterian during that time. Graduated in 2004, and that's when we moved up to the Northwest from Southern California to plant a Presbyterian church.
Which of the split P's were you a part of?
PCA,
okay.
Presbyterian Church in America.
Maybe describe to the audience a little bit what's unique about PCA.
It came out of the Southern Presbyterian Church in 1973, and over issues of liberalism creeping into the mainline. And the PCA began as a desire to retain our theological heritage coming to us from the 16th century reformers and the Westminster Confession of Faith and all of that, but marry that with theological conservatism and zeal for evangelism. That's what the PCA was all about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what can I say? I mean, of the evangelical Presbyterian churches, one of the best, in terms of their commitment to Christ and Scripture and evangelization.
Yeah, and I was, I really fit in well. And even to this day, I feel like my personality is really suited to be an old school Presbyterian. And it's people always tell me, because Presbyterians are so sure of themselves and so sure of their theology. If you leave, oh, you must not have gotten it. You just didn't get it. Or something happened to you to make you not want it anymore. Or you were disillusioned in some way. You weren't happy. And I've tried my best to try to convince people, no, I was as happy and comfortable in my Presbyterian skin as anybody. I loved it. I was planting and pastoring a successful church, a growing church. I was writing books and magazine articles for well-known Presbyterian publishing houses. I didn't have a thing to complain about. I had a great salary and wonderful elders who led the church with me. I had an assistant pastor. There wasn't anything about my life as a Presbyterian minister that was bothering me at all.
So from your time in seminary, ordination, pastorate, planting, during that time, solidly committed to your conservative Presbyterian theology and practice?
Right in the middle of it all
Okay.
is when the first argument I encountered about the Catholic understanding of, it started with the Catholic understanding of church and the Catholic understanding of authority and how that all relates to the Bible. Okay. So I was old school Presbyterian through and through, Calvinist, confessional Reformed guy, wore a black Geneva gown when I preached and administered the Lord's table, the whole deal. And then I stumbled across...
But to you at the time, I don't want to pause you there too much, but what was church to an old school Presbyterian? What is church?
Church for me then was very different than what church was as an evangelical guy in Calvary Chapel. Church for a Calvinist is where God's saving activity happens. It's where the means of grace, word and sacrament are offered, served to God's people. And so church was the place where God calls us, summons us into his presence, into his heavenly liturgy. Church is the place where the word of God is read and preached, where God judges and justifies us. It's where he feeds us with his body and blood from his table. And it's the place from which he sends us out in the benediction to go out into the world. It's very, very Catholic.
Yeah.
The reformers, they didn't see themselves as reinventing the wheel in this regard. They really saw themselves as trying to preserve what they understood it to be the early church's emphasis.
Yeah, instead of the marks being one holy Catholic and apostolic, though, it would have been the proclamation of the gospel and the sacraments rightly administered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So there you are.
There I am. I get an email along with a few other people that it was addressed to, some seminary professors and others, from a friend of mine who graduated with me, with a link to an article that a Catholic guy had written. And the Catholic guy, he lived in St. Louis at the time. He used to be a Protestant. He used to be a PCA guy, and he actually went to Covenant Seminary. And he became a Catholic, and he wrote this article challenging the Reformed understanding, the Calvinistic understanding of sola scriptura. Scripture alone is our authority. And it planted this seed of doubt in my mind because I just hadn't heard it put this way. And, it's like John the Baptist says, the axe is laid to the root of the tree. This is hacking away at the core of my identity as a Presbyterian, because you're calling into question my own theological identity by calling into question sola scriptura. And I couldn't just, I'm not the kind of guy who can just oh, that's interesting, I'm going to go play video games. It's like I have to pursue this, because if there's something... At this point, I thought I had all my loose ends tied up, my theological loose ends. I can preach Christ from all of the scriptures. I can put all scripture in its covenantal context. I don't like gray areas. I don't like, not knowing stuff, what's going on. So being confronted with this Catholic claim about the authority of the magisterium caused me great consternation. I started obsessing over it, constantly thinking about it. I wanted to buy a bunch of books off Amazon that were recommended, good books, the kind of stuff you would recommend. But I did that, but I didn't have the patience to wait the 5 to 7 business days. So I also went to Barnes & Noble and just bought whatever I can get off the shelf there and just started reading and studying. And it was significantly sucker punched by what I was encountering. But there was still this, I still had an out. Because for a Calvinist, it's all about the gospel. It's all about the justification of the sinner. It's all about how the sinner becomes a saint. And so any Catholic arguments about pedigree and succession and bishops, going back to the apostles and sacramental laying on of hands, those are all kind of a stone in your shoe as long as the Catholic Church doesn't know the gospel. In other words, these arguments that you're making over here about sola scriptura are annoying, and they're humbling, but they're not deal-breaking. Because after all, you don't know how to answer the more basic question of what must I do to be saved? You mess that up. And as long as the Catholic Church messes that up, then I'd rather be unauthoritatively right about the gospel than authoritatively wrong.
When you look back on that article by this former Protestant became Catholic that was laying the axe at the root of your tree of sola scriptura, was there one particular thing that he said, or was it the whole presentation? There was
one particular thing he said.
Okay.
What he was doing was he was attacking the idea or questioning the idea, arguing against the idea that there's a fundamental distinction between the evangelicals and the way they think of the Bible and church and authority and the way the Presbyterians do. Because we as Presbyterians thought, we're not evangelicals. We're not evangelicals at all. We care about the church. We care about the means of grace. We care about the sacraments. We care about the creeds and the confessions and catechisms of the church. We care about the early church fathers. We're not like those no creed but Christ, just me and my Bible types, you know? But what this fellow was doing in his article was saying, in principle, there's no difference between the two of you. And the illustration he used to hammer that home was, he said, even you as a Presbyterian who submits to the teachings of the Reformed churches, but you submit to those teachings because you already think they're the most biblical, because they conform most closely to your own personal interpretation of Scripture. So he says, what you're doing is you're shooting an arrow at the wall and then painting the target around where the arrow hit. And I thought, oh, that's a good point. You know, he's making a good point. I don't like this. And that's really what began for me this quest. And I got to the point where I realized, if I'm going to say that since the Catholic Church gets the gospel wrong, all of their incredibly challenging arguments about authority I can dismiss. Because even if an angel from heaven, preaches another gospel, let him be anathema, as St. Paul says. Well, if I'm at this place, I may as well take the opportunity to start looking at what the Catholic Church actually says about the gospel, rather than being told what the Catholic Church says by my church. And so I thought, I've been brought this far, but they don't get the gospel right. But I can't just leave it there because I'm just too curious. I need to start really looking into what the Catholic understanding of how do you answer that question? What must I do to be saved? And what happens in justification? And what does Paul say? How do they deal with Romans 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and Galatians 2 and 3? How do they deal with those passages?
Our guest today is Jason Stellman. It's really kind of amazing what a profound idea this is. In other words, if I want to know what Catholics teach about, I got to listen to Catholics and not just what we've always said Catholics say.
Yeah, that's a principle. I've actually learned that principle of dialogue since I become a Catholic, or since I've been engaging with Catholicism. The principle of, if you want to know what about a position, find someone who loves that position and let him tell you what it is, rather than let someone who hates that position tell you what it is, because that's just a principle of charity that I had to let them do.
225 years ago, the first that I know of American Protestant clergy convert of America, Father Thayer, he became a Catholic priest, but he was what cracks me up is that the way his journey started is he was visiting Italy, and he thought, in the same way, if I was in where Mohammed's lived and I wanted to know what Mohammed's believed, I would ask a Mohammed. I'm in Italy. I don't want to become Catholic, but if I'm going to tell someone what Catholics believe, I'm going to ask a Catholic.
When in Rome, right?
There you go. I mean, that's what got you.
Yeah.
So you're starting to look.
I'm starting to look, and I'm pretty well versed in the New Testament, and it's one of my main focuses of study during my years as a student in seminary. And so I thought I need to go back to Paul, but I also need to go back to Jesus too, and I need to start looking at the way Jesus speaks about judgment, sin, the relationship of faith and works, and what happens on the last day. And so I began to sort of go through the New Testament again, doing a couple things. Number one, writing down passages that just didn't seem to fit my paradigm that well. Not passages I don't agree with, because I'm a conservative theological guy. I'm not going to read a passage and say, I don't believe what Jesus said there. But stuff that he said that I wouldn't have put it that way. Yeah. Like, he did, but I wouldn't have. Why is that? So I was writing those passages down, and I was trying to deduce at the same time, like, if somebody with my paradigm, my working operative understanding of the gospel wouldn't have said it that way, who would have? What kind of ideas about the gospel would someone have to make them say it this way? And you get to, passages like James 2 and Abraham was justified not by faith alone, but by works, and many other passages. And my big project was kind of trying to figure out, like, if a guy with my working assumptions, my paradigm, wouldn't say it this way, what kind of working assumptions or paradigm would the person who said it have, most likely? And so I was trying to deduce, like, what's the gospel? What's like a one sentence or one paragraph, encapsulation of the gospel that would lead the writers of the New Testament and Jesus himself to say the things and write the things that they did. And once I figured that out for myself, I called up the guy who wrote that initial article. This is several years later. We had become friends, and I called him up and I said, what do you think about this? And I read it to him, and he goes, oh yeah, that's just like what the Catholic tradition has always said about the gospel. And I thought, oh, so I've sort of gotten there through this, roundabout way, arriving at what it turns out has been the Catholic and Augustinian view of grace and salvation and faith and works the whole time. I just took longer to do it, I guess.
How would you summarize that? I mean, to our audience.
Just the idea that that because of the love of God, he sends his son to be the second Adam and to be the true Israelite and to offer himself as a sacrifice, which is what Adam ought to have done, and what the Levitical offerings for Israel taught them how to do. Jesus comes as the consummate second Adam and true Israelite, offers himself as a sacrifice. And because of that offering and his resurrection and ascension, we are united to him by faith because of the Holy Spirit indwelling us to the degree, and there's nothing so far that a Calvinist is going to disagree with. Right. But you start fleshing it out in more Trinitarian and familial terms, to the degree we're united to Christ that the Father reproduces his own image in us and enables us to actually do works, good works of love of God and neighbor that are praiseworthy and meritorious and contributory to our final salvation. That's where the Calvinist digs his heels. He doesn't like this idea that we're doing anything that contributes to the work of Christ, because in his mind, it's almost a zero-sum game where you're taking away from the sufficiency of the cross if you say that any of your cross-bearing matters in a causal way. But the genius of the Catholic gospel is that God is a father, not just a judge and lawgiver. And in the same way that when I see my own son, who's 6, start to exhibit traits like me and fend for himself, he just lost his first tooth, When I see my kids learn how to, be potty trained and strap themselves into the car and get their own jammies on at night, I don't get threatened by that. Like, you're making me useless. You're making me superfluous by learning how to live and be self-sufficient. It gives me pride to see my children bear my image because I'm their father. Well, lesser to the greater, if God is our Heavenly Father, then it doesn't take away from the sufficiency of His grace when He sees us enabled by the power of the Holy Spirit to keep the law. He doesn't get threatened by that, because good fathers don't get threatened when their children grow up and become mature. Yeah. And that's the paradigm shift that happened. It's almost like I became Trinitarian for the first time, even though I was always Trinitarian before. But before I was Trinitarian just in case a Mormon knocked at my door. And I had the arguments for the Trinity to give to the Mormon or the Jehovah's Witness. But now it's like the Trinity and the fatherhood of God became the very bedrock of the gospel in a way that I just never was able to see before.
Well, as James says, you can't just be a hearer, you got to be a doer too.
Yeah.
So you've discovered this as you're a pastor. Now what happens?
Well, I spent a couple of years trying to work it out on my own. And I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. I was completely isolated. I couldn't talk to my elders. I couldn't talk to my associate pastor. I couldn't talk to other ministers in my denomination.
Your wife?
I talked to my wife about it, but she, those conversations didn't go anywhere. She respects me a lot, but she just thought, wow, really, the Catholic Church. I eventually had to tell my elders after a couple years of wrestling, or more, 3 years. I'm struggling with these Catholic questions, and I feel like I need like a sabbatical or something where I can travel and talk with other ministers and professors and PhDs that I know who can set me straight and talk me down off this ledge. And so they granted that sabbatical for me. It didn't have the desired effect on their part because I wasn't talked down off the ledge. And so in June of 2012, of last year, I submitted my resignation to the Presbyterian Church in America and came into the church the following September of last year.
All right. First of all, creedcodecult.com. Explain that, and if they want to know more about your journey, can they find it there?
Yes. I've had a blog since 2006, and it's had a couple different names, and it's had a couple different sort of incarnations. Okay. Creed Code Cult, I called it that. I actually stole that from Peter Kraft, whom I respect greatly, and I bet you he probably stole it from someone too. Creed, what do we believe? Code, how do we live? Cult, how do we worship? That's what the Christian life is all about. And so it's basically a website where I have a lot of audio and teachings and lectures I've given and teachings I've done, as well as I usually once a week write a blog post. We're talking now about the Eucharist. And I sort of write the posts, and I sort of back away and let people. I have a lot of Protestant readers because it was a Protestant blog before it was a Catholic one, and so I'll write a post and have 500 comments in a week of people hashing out and debating these issues. It's really fun.
Let's say watching right now we have either a member of Calvary Chapel or a Presbyterian. What would you want to say to them to encourage them to make the same journey home you've made?
I'd say go to my website and go to the Contact Me page and write me. Write me. I will write you back. That's what I would say.
What would you say, though, from a theological standpoint or personal standpoint?
I would say that the native soil of the truths that we all love is Roman soil. And during the Reformation, some of those truths were plucked up and planted elsewhere, Geneva, Saddleback, different places. But sometimes when you do that, those flowers might grow, but they might grow too big, and they might choke out other things you need. And what I found is that fear I had initially, that I'm going to have to give up everything I thought I knew and start from scratch when I become a Catholic, was the farthest thing from the truth. Because when I became a Catholic, I realized everything that I had that was true and beautiful, I brought with me. But now it exists in the right ecosystem. It exists in the right relationship with other truths that maybe were eclipsed before. And it all is in its proper place now.
Oh, I got a minute left, but I want quickly. How did Our Lady fit into your journey?
At first I didn't know what to really make of it, as well as the communion of saints.
Yeah.
But when I started understanding God as a Father, and when I understood the Church as His divine family that He's fathering in the world, the idea that I'd have a Blessed Mother and I'd have a communion of saints that I can call upon for prayer made perfect sense once I understood the Trinity from a Catholic point of view.
All right. Jason, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing
Thank you for having
your
me.
journey on the journey home. And again, creed code cult, one word.com. If you want to get in touch with Jason, catch up with his blog, find out more about the details of the journey. You have to summarize the whole thing on the short program. It's hard to do that, but you did a superb job. It's good to have you home.
Thank you. Thank you very
Good
much.
to have you home. Welcome home.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. God bless you. See you next week. Thank you, Jason.